second session of model view controller. In the previous session we have seen HTTP handlers, and in this session what we'll do is that we will see that how we can use the core ASP.NET with HTTP handlers to implement the MVC framework, right? Let's first try to understand that what is model view controller, and then we'll take up a small sample and try to complete that in from the practical point of view, and try to implement MVC from the practical point of view, right? When we talk about any project or any kind of requirement, right, it's all about action, format and data. So the user does some kind of action, and then you have some kind of format. In the format, probably that when I say format, I'm going to say the display in the ASPX file or the Windows application or whatever it is, and then that format or that view actually takes up some data and displays to the user. So you have an action, you have a format, and you have a data. So let's first take up a small sample and see that how we can implement this in ASP.NET, core ASP.NET using HTTP handlers, right? So let's say that the user goes to a home page. Now this is one of the action. This is basically a simple customer application. So in this customer application, the user can go to a home page. The user can see customer data with sales figure, or he can see a customer data without sales figure. So basically we have three actions. The first action, he goes to a home page. The second action, he wants a sales figure. He wants to see the customer data with sales figure. And the third action is where he wants to see the customer data but without the sales figure. So we will see that how we can implement this simple requirement using ASP.NET and HTTP handler, right? So as we said, the whole world is about, or the projects are about action, view and data. When I say data, I mean to say the model. So the model view controller, as the name says, right, is nothing but, it's basically divided into three entities. So the model is nothing but it is the data of your application. The view is basically your design, the format, and the actions is nothing but the actions are nothing but your controller. I mean to say from where it will actually take up the view and the model. So basically when we see our application which we just talked about, it has actions like go to home, and this go to home basically will map to a view. So when you request a go to home, you would expect that a home.aspx page should be displayed, and for the current thing, the home.aspx has no model, so it doesn't actually basically goes to a database to fetch something. If the customer hits the action saying okay, view customer without sales, it basically maps to the ASPX file, say a file or the format or the view, display customer without sales, and the display customer without sales basically fetches the data for using the CLS customer class. So basically it uses a model. In the same way, the third action is where the customer wanted to see the customer with sales. He is mapped to a display customer with sales.aspx, and which again actually uses the model to get data. So basically we can say that every action is basically mapped to view, and every view needs data. So that is the model, right? Now if you look at the overall picture of it, is what you can see is that okay, you have an action, and this action basically leads to a view, and the view basically leads to a model, right? So if you really look at the figure, you can see that you have an action, you have a view, and then you have a model. But the problem here is that if you look at this link over here, it is basically tightly coupled. I mean to say your view is tied up with a model, your action is tied up with a view, right? So you would like to actually decouple this whole thing, so that you can make it you can probably make the application more generalized, more maintainable, and in a more decoupled fashion. So what we do is that we introduce one more entity into this, and that is called as the controller. So what's the job of the controller? Basically he sits in between as an intermediator between the action, the view and the model. So when anybody says okay, I want to get the home page, the controller goes and fetches any kind of data if the home page needs, and then ties up that with the view and sends it back to the user. So basically you can say that controller does the work of separation of the model, the view and the action, right? So let's do this example which we had discussed previously. Let's say that we have action go to home, so you should see a home.aspx with two links. If you say that okay, your action is view customer without sales, then you should see or display something like this. And if you say that you want to see customer with sales, then you should see the sales figure, right? So we have two views here, right? Two views, I'm going to say three views, I'll say rather. Okay, so that the first view is the home page, the second view is without sales, and the third view is with sales, right? And then we have three actions, and every action mapped to the corresponding view. Okay, so let's pull up the source code. So here's my source code. So I have made three views. You can see display customer without sales, display customer with sales, and the home.aspx. And my model is basically nothing but it's a simple class of customer, basically having a customer name, a customer address, a customer sales, and then I have a collection here which basically loads some dummy data. Basically in real projects, this data will be loaded from SQL Server or Oracle or some kind of database, right? Now this is my model, these are my views, the three ASPX files. Now let's look at the controller part. In the controller, what I say is that I have made a handler. I have made three handlers. One is CLS handler customer without sales, one is CLS customer with sales, and the third one is CLS home handler, right? Basically when you design application, you can make this, it's not necessary that for every action you need one handler. You can combine that, but here for the simplicity's sake, I have just kept three handlers, right? So as this is a handler, I have implemented the IHTTP handler and then override and then implemented the process request method, right? In the process request method, the first job of the handler or the controller is that it should first create the object of the model, load the model, update the model, and then send that model to the view and load the appropriate view. So here the controller or the action is CLS handler customer without sales. So what he does is that he goes and he first loads the customer object or the customer model, then he adds this into a context so that this can be sent in the session to the view, and then he says, okay, transfer this to this view, transfer this whole control now to this view. And in the view customer without sales, what I've done is that basically first thing I do is that I just fetch the data from the context and tie it up with my grid. Now in this grid, I've ensured that I'm not because this view is basically to view the customer without sales, so I have not bounded the sales column, right? And the same is with customer with sales. So in this again, you will see that basically it has just taken the data from the context and bind it to the grid, right? And the final thing what we need to do is that we need to map the controller or the handlers to the actions. So I said, okay, CLS home handler, you are going to be you are mapped with go to home action. CLS handler customer without sales, you are mapped to action view customer without sales, and CLS handler customer with sales is mapped to view customer with sales. Now let's look at how the whole MVC will actually run. So we run it. You can get the source code from questpointvd.com and if you have bought the DVD, you can get that in the source code folder. So the first thing I'll do is that I'll say, okay, go to home action. Now as soon as I say go to home action, it actually just displays me two links saying two links of the application. Now I say, okay, view customer with sales. As soon as I fire this action, it goes to the controller, that is view customer with sales. He executes the logic and transfers it to the proper view, loads the proper model and transfer it to a proper view. So you can say that here I am seeing the data of I am seeing the view that is customer with sales, and I can also specify finally without sales, and here you can see that there is no sales column. So what has happened is basically we have an action. The action is mapped to the controller. We had created three controllers. I'll just again revise what we had done. So we had three actions: go to home, view customer with sales, view customer without sales. So what I've done is that basically I've created three controllers: CLS handler customer without sales, CLS handler customer with sales, and CLS home handler. And in the process request, because this is a controller, the first work of the controller is to load and update the model. So I've loaded the customer model, loaded the object, then I have loaded the appropriate view. For example, over here it is the with sales, and passed the data to the view. In this way, what has happened is my actions are now separated from the view and my model is now separated from the view. So we have a clear kind of decoupling here, and with this you can increase usability. You can do a nice level of testing on the controller or on the view or on the model itself. I hope that I was able to explain you that how we can implement MVC using core ASP.NET and HTTP handler. In the next session, what we'll do is that we will try to see that how we can implement ASP.NET, implement MVC using ASP.NET using the ready-made framework provided by Microsoft. You can get the source code of HTTP handler implementation of MVC using core ASP.NET on the corresponding video site or on the DVD. I hope that this session was useful, and see you in the next session of MVC.